how is the mainstream direct market retailer supposed to survive? I'll tell you how they survive. They start selling Pokemon cards. They start selling Funko Pops. They basically become geek bodegas, and they stop being comic book shops. They shrink the amount of new comic books that they're selling, and they just focus on back issues, which are still popular, and they can still buy in abundance. They stop buying new comics. The market shrinks, pay gets lower, talent gets worse. It's a death spiral.
Just a few short years ago, Rob Salkowitz was claiming it's raining money in comic books. And now it almost sounds like he believes comic books are dying. There's this article up on ICV2.com talking about the state of comic books. And it's weird, Aaron, how after Heidi McDonald said it's okay to say that there's a lack of enthusiasm and quality in comic books, that people are jumping to the same conclusion and information that I put out 3 years ago on this stuff, 4 years ago.
Yeah, it's all the stuff that every one of us has been talking about for years now. But now it's okay to say it. You're not allowed to say why. Heidi still won't allow you to say why. And even in her articles, she'll be like, and we don't have time to get into all that. Yeah, of course we don't. Of course we don't, because it disproves everything you've been saying for years, and it proves all of us right. Because some of us had the moral courage to call out the problems as they were happening. We didn't try to protect our little invites to little, Comic-Con soirees and whatnot. Some of us were willing to go out there and talk about the hard facts.
So the stupid lie that had been going around comic books and permeating comic books media for a very long time was that scholastic graphic novels and manga blowing up was the same thing as Marvel and DC blowing up, rather than leaving them in the wayside and far behind. And now we have Mr. Salkowitz basically jumping on top of this, tilting at windmills, rundown of all the comic scan sales data of graphic novels in the bookstore chain. And I'm going to do a full video of my analysis on this, but this is him basically talking about some troubling trends that he just now discovered, Aaron. The first thing that jumps off the spreadsheet is how complete Scholastic's domination in the marketplace has become. The company owns the top 9 slots and 16 of the top 20, driven by the maniacal force of kid lit that is Dab Pilkey. More than 15 years into the Scholastic-led explosion of young reader graphic novels, it's worth asking if this is doing the wider industry or even the medium of comics much good. But more fundamentally, we seem to have come full circle from comics aren't just for kids anymore to comics seem to be just for grown-ups now to is anyone but kids buying graphic novels in big numbers.
Yeah, well, it's not kids buying the graphic novels. It's them coming home with the little Scholastic. I assume that it's still very much the same, where you get the little pamphlet with all the
book fair
stuff in it. Yeah, the book fair. Man, I used to live for that when I was a kid. It's like, all right, I read so many good books from Scholastic because of that. I assume that it's still pretty much the same, where you go in and you check off what you want, and then you pay, and then the books show up. Yeah, it's not kids doing that. It's kids choosing the books, and then it's their parents buying them. So, it's still adults that are obviously buying the books, but it's because the kids are interested in them. And thank goodness there's some force out there that's getting kids to want to read comics, because God knows C.B. Cebulski and Jim Lee have no idea how to make kids want to read comics or how to produce comics that kids would be interested in. They certainly have no plan to get comics in the hands of kids. They've been chasing, they lament the fact that all of the fans, they're all these, 40 to 50-year-old guys, and they're all dying. We're all dying at 40 and 50. Now there's a lot of 30-year-olds, there's a lot of 20-year-olds getting into comics. Not as many as there used to be, because the comics aren't good.
And the weird thing is this trend that he's talking about was apparent 8 years ago. Why is it just now we're able to go, I wonder if the success of Dogman and Diary of a Wimpy Kid is doing comic books as a medium any good, when it was completely apparent 6 years ago or 8 years ago that it wasn't.
No, but what we like to do in the comic book industry is we like to stick our head in the sand, and we like to go, no. We like to deny all the problems until it's catastrophic. And that's the way that the comic industry, runs as well, is it's just reactive. But first, try to deny everything until it's so catastrophic that it cannot be denied anymore. And even then, you've got to make excuses so that you don't look bad, for all of the gaslighting and all of the propaganda that you've put out there as to why, the problem doesn't exist. And then, the problem exists, but it's not because of the reasons that you say it exists. This is a typical pattern. It's a very political pattern. And as comics has gotten more political, it's been adopted more into the comic book industry. But the truth is, the comic book industry has never been very good at pivoting. It's never been very good at planning ahead. It is made up of a lot of people who don't have any vision, who just kind of go along to get along, who just keep doing the same things and expecting different results.
Next up, Mr. Sokolowitz states, for many in my Gen X cohort, and for the boomers before us raised on ECs and Marvel Silver Age material, some comic stories seem slightly more sophisticated than average kid lit, especially ones that required some awareness of the wider world. It was a rite of passage to progress from Archie and Richie Rich to Detective Comics and X-Men. Certainly, there is no clear path from Dogman to almost anything sold periodically in the direct market, despite plenty of hopes and efforts spent attempting to build those bridges. There was never any guarantee how many of these readers would carry over, but after this long, it seems increasingly clear that the number is not that much greater than the number of kids who develop into lifelong direct market customers through any other on-ramp. Yes, you don't naturally just go from Dogman to reading Batman, especially with the amount of violence and sex and the amount of cursing and all that stuff in there. There's actually needs to be a bridge. But what DC Comics have done, and I'm sure you've noticed this, if you look at all their YA graphic novels that you would think maybe would be able to go from Dogman and maybe get you into a Detective Comics or Superman like that, they're all LGBTQ slice of life, like romance books now. They don't even try to develop or promote or market the characters to this generation.
No, and the versions of the characters that they give you in those YA books, even assuming someone did jump from Dogman to say, I don't know, what was it, Gotham Academy or I Am Starfire, or any of the trash that they put out. Even if you made that jump, there's nothing in those books that are going to make you go, oh, well, now I want to read regular Batman. As you get older, there's just nothing there. That you're right, there is no bridge. And another huge problem is, and we talk about this, and people like High Deal say, like, oh, you're going backwards and blah blah blah. Because like when I was a kid, and I would go to the grocery store with my mom, the first thing I would do is go over to the periodicals. I'd go over to the magazines. I'd look for Mad Magazine. I'd look for comic books. I'd look through the Archie digests. If you had that still, and you could find someone had the ability to license Dogman and do Dogman comics, and have those sitting next to Archie, have those sitting next to, Superman, Batman, that were kid friendly, that were accessible by kids, you would have that bridge, because that's how I got into the wider world of comics. I started out with Archie and Sugar and Spike from DC, those little digests that they would do. And then I was like, as I was looking around, I was like, oh, what's this? This is, Superman. This is, Star Wars, G.I. Joe, the toys that I was interested in got me interested in comics. I started reading comics. In those comics are ads for the X-Men, ads for the Avengers. These characters look cool. So the next time I'm at the liquor store, the next time I'm at the grocery store, I grab those off the rack and I start looking through them. And then I spend my allowance on a couple of those books. And the next thing you know, I'm into the wider Marvel universe. I'm into the wider DC universe. And I have this, what I thought was going to be a lifelong love affair with buying comics from Marvel and DC. And, in the last 10 years, they've certainly killed that. But that used to be the bridge. And they don't have any plan, any kind of idea of how to create that kind of synergy from one genre to the other, from one, reading level to the next. There's no plan for that anymore.
And you mentioned, I would go and I'd get my allowance and I would go to spend it on comic books. Kids can't take allowance money and spend it on comic books anymore. They are so effing expensive. A new #1 comic book by a character of any type of notoriety from DC or Marvel is guaranteed to be at a minimum $6. If it's a character you don't care about, it's likely to be $5, sometimes maybe $4. But even at $4 for your standard comic book these days, it's far too expensive. And they've driven off so many people trying to find this phantom other audience that they wanted to replace everybody, that they actually can't go back. They actually can't change the pricing structure of what they've got now, because they shrunk the audience down so much that the print runs are so small that they can't justify getting them under $4 at this point. And it appears to me that unless Marvel and DC and their parent companies are willing to lose money to go and bridge to this audience, they have basically probably lost them pretty much for good, except for a few people that are going to discover these characters later on. But certainly not through comic books the way that you would have expected before, going from Archie, going from Richie Rich, Mad Magazine, up to your more superhero type of stuff.
Yeah, and nobody has any kind of new ideas. Nobody has any kind of plan. One of the things that that James Silvani and I pitched when we were trying to get the Darkwing and the Gargoyles license before Dynamite came in and swooped it up, and we all know how that's turned out. Is we said, like, hey, give us this license. What we're going to do is we're going to produce a trade. We're going to do, 4 issues worth of content. We're going to put it out as a trade online, direct to consumer as a pre-order. Once that is, once those books are set out, we'll cut those 4 issues up and we'll put them out directly to comic book shops as floppies. But we're going to reverse the model to where we're selling the trade first, and then floppies can go out to stores with new covers and things like that for people that want to buy them that way and want to have them in their collection that way. Then what we wanted to do was take part of the profits and do dollar versions of the books, $1.50 versions of the books, kind of like what Alterna does, where they do like a really, like old school newsprint, do a cheaper version of that and get that out to like dollar stores. And also donate a bunch of them to pediatricians' offices, to children's hospitals. Have a bunch of books that we could donate so that you could get kids into these characters, you could get kids into these books, and you could get kids into comics. Would that plan have worked? I don't know. But it was like we were trying to come up with ideas to get books out there, to get kids interested, and to have them develop this lifelong love of reading comic books. And now I look around and I'm like, why would I want to put a kid through that? Why would I want a kid to have to suffer through the same terrible stories that we're getting from these hack writers and these, editors that don't care, that don't know what they're doing, or that are just, running out the clock on their career, and have just completely checked out? Why would I want to get a kid into that? It's absolutely disheartening. And so, you go off and you just say, I'm going to do my own stuff. I'm not even going to try to be part of the mainstream industry anymore, because the mainstream industry is on its last legs. And none of the people that are in control of it have any interest in finding a way to make it viable again.
This is the final thing that I took away from the Rob Sockowitz article talking about the books gain sales data. One of the most disappointing tidbits in the sales chart is the complete disappearance of DC and Marvel, which together account for under 10% of the total non-manga book market in 2023. Collecting story arcs as trade books used to represent a reasonable way for publishers and creators to recoup the cost of ongoing and limited series that went into a sales decay after the first issue. The predictability of these moves may have hurt in the medium term by including a wait for the trade mentality among readers, but in the long run, having these stories in print and widely available was a selling point. I've been talking about this from the day my channel started. The strategy that Marvel and DC had, that every single story that they wrote needed to be in a trade, was a terrible idea. It basically just flooded the market with mediocrity. They needed to identify the very best stories they had made for that year, or the very best stories on a character, and only make those available in trades. Nobody cares about DC Comics trades right now. They care about the Watchmen, they care about the Dark Knight Returns, and they probably even care about the Court of Owls and stuff like that. But anything new, no one even looks for anymore. Same thing with Marvel, but even worse, because they don't even have a freaking Watchmen. Infinity Gauntlet doesn't sell quite like that. And because they put every single story, whether it was good or not, in trade paperback, took away the mystique and the understanding that when something was actually released in trade, that it was something worth collecting.
Yeah, I mean, Marvel should be focused on those things, and I think that I think Marvel's omnibus strategy is pretty good, because we're getting big runs of books when they were good. But yeah, DC's strategy is just like, hey, just everything's got to be a trade. So Fire and Ice, that series that nobody bought and everybody who bought it hated, or everybody who read it hated, that's got to be collected into a trade. Why? So you can sell 100 copies of that to retailers that are just checking things off of a list and aren't even paying attention to what, I just better get 2 of these, better get 3 of these. That's your strategy. Like, stop it. You're pouring money down the hole, and Jim Lee doesn't care, because he just gets to go onto the red carpet, and be out there with his wife and look at how impressive I am. Here I am with these celebrities hobnobbing. He's supposed to be making sure that all of the DC characters are consistent in all forms of media. They're not. What does he actually do? What does he actually contribute? Who is running the ship at DC? Somebody's running it, but they're running it into the goddamn iceberg.
That is absolutely happening. If you look at those numbers, there's one new superhero comic book that was collected in trade that actually could compete with manga as a whole, could compete with Dab Pilkey as a whole, could actually compete with Solo Leveling in the graphic novel sales market. That is TMNT: The Last Ronin, which is basically taking TMNT and giving people a story that they actually wanted, thought of by the original creators, doing something with the characters that move them forward. Nobody else is trying to do this. Nobody is trying to make a Batman story for Batman fans. They're trying to make Batman for a new audience that hasn't showed up yet. They're not trying to make Avengers stories for Avengers fans. That is the biggest disconnect right now. Because they're not actually writing very many stories for the people that should want to read them, nobody's checking it out. And nobody, it feels like, is really learning from what's going on with TMNT The Last Ronin, other than maybe Skybound, because it certainly appears that the Transformers reboot, Duke, Cobra Commander are actually written for the audience that would like to read the book.
Yeah, it's they're the, you know, and it's to Kirkman's credit and to Skybound's credit that you know, he still, even with all his success, even with all the money that he's made off of The Walking Dead, Invincible, all these things that he's got going, that he still understands the mentality of the comic book fan, because Robert Kirkman started out as a fan, and a lot of the people that we have in now, you know, do you honestly believe Tom Brevoort loves comics anymore? I mean, do you really? Yeah. You know, do you think CB Cebulski loves comics? No, he loves food blogging. That's what he wishes he was doing. This is just a punch clock for those guys. They come in, you know, they punch their time card, they put in their time, they get through it as quickly as possible, you know, with as little pain to them as possible, and they just put out product, and they don't care. They don't care what the product is. They don't care about satisfying the fans. Fans have been asking for a decade or more now. We want Peter Parker and Mary Jane's relationship restored. That's what we want. And Marvel refuses to give it to them. And so they give it to them in an alternate universe. And what happens? The sales blow up. Well, you could be doing that. You could be doing numbers on your flagship title, Amazing Spider-Man, the title at Marvel that has carried the company and the brand since its existence. You could be doing that, and you're not. You're putting Zeb Wells on there, and he's writing nonsensical stories, and we're having to read about characters we don't care about, like Paul. You know, just... It's not hard. All of these things. This X-Men relaunch could be good. It's just you go back to the core of what made the characters popular to begin with. But they refuse to do that because 12 weirdos on Twitter will cry about how they didn't get enough LGBTQ representation since the Krakoa era in the new books. So you're going to double down on the thing that killed your line to begin with, and you're just going to keep doing it's insanity. It's doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And it's absolute insanity. And it's because there's people at the corporate level that have been promoted beyond their effectiveness. It's the Peter principle in full effect. And it's killing these franchises. It's killing this industry. It's actually, you know, and to quote Richard Meyer, it's actually killing people now. The comic industry is actually killing people. Congratulations. This is what you've turned it into.
You know what is not crazy is that 4 or 5 years after making a video pointing out all these exact problems, that the mainstream comic book media finally have come around to actually admitting and identifying the elephant in the room, the thing that is sitting right in front of your face. It's so clear you can't deny it, but for some reason they decided they would deny it for another half a decade, and now they have nowhere else to go but to admit the truth. Dogman does nothing for DC Marvel in the direct market. Manga doesn't really do anything for DC Marvel in the direct market. Solo Leveling doesn't do anything for the Marvel DC in the direct market. None of this success, this overwhelming success, this enormous amount of new readers coming into comic books in the American market, none of it has done anything but highlight the dysfunction and the failure of Marvel and DC over the past decade and a half.
Yeah, and let's not leave Diamond out of this equation. Diamond with their absolute stupidity. Steve Jeppy with his idiot plan to shut down the complete industry because he got scared about COVID and just ground the industry to a halt. And then, you know, as much as we all hated the Diamond monopoly, it was good for retailers in the sense that all the books being there gave them ease of ordering. Yeah, Diamond sucked. Yeah, they didn't have to improve because there was no competition. But the discount that you got on the books was better. And once they broke this up amongst all these different distributors, retailers are not getting those same discounts anymore. So they're making less profit. So they're selling less books because Marvel and DC are churning out crap. And they're getting less of a discount. How is the mainstream direct market retailer supposed to survive? I'll tell you how they survive. They start selling Pokemon cards. They start selling Funko Pops. They start selling all these other... They basically become geek bodegas, and they stop being comic book shops. They shrink the amount of new comic books that they're selling, and they just focus on back issues, which are still popular, and they can still buy in abundance. They focus on, you know, other product lines. They stop buying new comics. The market shrinks, pay gets lower, talent gets worse. It's a death spiral, and I don't think there's any coming back from it. I'd like to be optimistic. I'd like to say that the industry could be saved. The industry, as it exists right now, cannot be saved.
This is just the beginning of the podcast that Aaron and I do, the Geek Fix. We're actually going to do a summer movie extravaganza. We're going to talk about all the movies that you cannot miss and most certainly want to miss this summer. along with a host of other geek things going on. When this goes up on YouTube, that podcast will already be live on Thinking Critical Patreon. If you haven't checked the Patreon out and you want some more Aaron Sparrow in your life, and you most certainly should, there's a link in the video description.